The main criticism of this is that you could put in any threat you wanted up here, even something as ridiculous as giant mutant space hamsters. And the grid would argue for the same thing. Let's get a little blood in there. That's always good for the students. So the grid would argue that it is better to go bankrupt creating a fleet of orbiting rodent traps than it is to even risk being hamster chow. So the grid would argue that we should take action no matter what the threat is, as long as we predict disaster down here. The grid says we should take action no matter what. Clearly, this is useless. So what my other videos did in order to patch that, and what the book does, is add one other element, which is key, which is that if the rows are equal probability, it is a toss-up. But you can go and look at what people are saying to get an idea of the relative probability of these. The problem with that is you just end up back in the shouting match with experts from different sides saying contrary things, and they all have PhDs out after their name, so what do you as a layperson know what to do? I won't spend a lot of time on it, but there's a very direct way to address this, which is to go and look at what the scientific societies are saying and what business leaders are saying, and in fact, in the U.S., what the national security experts are saying. And all of those are saying climate change is real, it will come soon, it will be bad, and we must act quick. If you go and look, there is a remarkable coalition and a remarkable level of agreement that this is the greatest challenge humanity has ever faced, and we've got a couple years to deal with it before we pass a point of no return. If you go and look at that, what that allows you to do with the grid is to move this line up. And now when you do the grid, and you also go and you look and you find out there's no credible threat. There are no economists who are predicting global depression. They actually predict there may be economic growth, moderate cost to economic growth. So now the grid, and over here, peak oil and overpopulation are going to make this not the party that it seemed. It will make this actually neutral as well. So now the grid looks very different, and it's pretty clear that you can give a robust analysis that column B is a ridiculous choice, especially trying to eke out just a couple more decades of business as usual on our fossil fuel economy. So this is where the grid stands now. I want to speak briefly about this Mr. Yuckface down here, because in the last couple years, our understanding of climate change has changed fundamentally. You might hear about models, climate models. Those are incorrectly, you get a bad answer. But what climate scientists have done recently is looked at what the climate in the past has done. And the picture we've gotten is extremely disconcerting. The global climate, is a nonlinear system with tipping points, feedback loops, and the butterfly effect, where small changes can have a huge result. And it looks like our climate system has done something like this. Our pretty blue planet has existed throughout long before human history in one of two dips. The cool dip, the glacial, and the warmer dip, the interglacial, which is where we are now. Small changes, very small changes in solar radiation has provided enough energy for this to flip back and forth between the two states. We used to think this change happened gradually. We now know that this change can happen within decades. We have evidence from Greenland that 10,000 years ago, Greenland changed by 11 degrees Celsius in 50 years, with a 3-degree change in 2 years. This is how our climate normally behaves, is it hangs out in one spot until there's a small bump, and then it flips quickly over to the other spot. Incidentally, this visual, by the way, I should give credit to it. I got it directly from another online video from an amateur called Wake Up, Freak Out, Then Get a Grip, which I can't recommend highly enough. It seems what the picture is now is that we are up here being pushed up by our fossil fuel emissions. And instead of the energy, the poke coming from the sun, it's coming from our fossil fuel emissions. And we're most of the way up this hill. And because of the warming in the pipeline, we are probably, even if we stopped all emissions today, we would probably end up right about there, at the tipping point, because of long lag times in the climate. No one knows exactly where this tipping point is. We know it exists, and we know that the longer that we continue with business as usual, the closer we get to it. That's what makes me highly agitated, because we don't know what's over here. We do know it's radically different from what we have now, which is why the term that we should be using is not global warming or even climate change. Really, the better term is global climate destabilization. Why that's bad news for humanity is every single human settlement is based on its current climate. And if you suddenly spin the dice and put that settlement in a different climate, all of the systems go wacky. This picture looks like Hurricane Katrina becomes the norm. We get dust bowls, we get epidemics, we get floods alternating with droughts, we get entire dead forests that go up in a conflagration of wildfires. We get resource wars, we get environmental refugees pouring over the border, and ethnic conflicts, ancient ethnic conflicts inflamed over resources. This is why, even though everyone in the room always thinks that their cause is the most important one in the room, I really do think my cause is the most important in the room, because I see this as paramount. Because if our climate is destabilized, if we hit that tipping point and go rolling over to the unknown territory, it will so dominate us as a human species that all other concerns will be overwhelmed. How much are people going to care if their apple is organic when they're just trying to find the next meal? How much resources will be available for the government to give grants when they're spending all of their budget intervening in resource wars around the world? Who's going to care about civil liberties when you're trying to shore up your borders against millions of environmental refugees coming across? The bottom line is, we're no longer concerned about environmental impacts. I think the new bottom line is all about greenhouse gas emissions. Because no one's going to care about arsenic in their drinking water if they're just trying to find something that doesn't give them dysentery. That's why this, I think, is a pragmatic issue. It is not an idealistic issue. It is not an aesthetic issue. It is not a values issue about whether you like wilderness. It is simply, how can I keep the world secure for how can I ensure the security of my 2 young daughters in the future? So, that's why Claudia said that I think we have less than 10 years in order to solve this. And here's why. Because it's like steering a large ship. If you wait until the threat is right in front of you and you crank the wheel, it's too late. You have to see the obstacle on the horizon and turn the wheel. The most dramatic 2 minutes in cinema, in movies, from my perspective, is the 2 minutes in the movie Titanic between when they spot the iceberg and start ringing the bell and when they hit the iceberg. It's agonizing because there are so many things that need to happen between being aware of the threat and when the threat comes true. And halfway through that, you've done everything you can. And all you can do is sit there and wait and hope that you did it in time. So if we wait until the average person sees their climate go wacky in order for us to make significant moves, we're decades too late. The only way we're going to keep civilization the way we like it is by thinking and anticipating and getting the average person to do that. So, what do? This is all about the next 10 years, right? So here's the roadmap. I don't know anything about climate change. So I just have to make bets, just like we're all making a bet on that grid. And when I'm betting on a horse race, I go and I look up the track records of those horses, and I bet on the one with the best track record. The climatologists out there with the best track record